Today I'm joined by Auron MacIntyre. He is a YouTuber, a breakout Twitter celebrity, a guaranteed Thiel Bucks recipient, a crypto leftist, possible Fed maybe. I don't know. Have you been have you been involved in that part of late term drama? And someone that I'm very happy to have on the show. Hey, Auron.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I remember the first time I interacted with your content. It was during a Dave the Distributist binge on YouTube. And you were either part of a stream or you were in the recommended, so you kind of have this related content. So I think it was a video about the cathedral that I saw first, and that was about, I don't know, a year or so ago. So I feel like I was kind of on the Auron MacIntyre train before it was cool. How long have you been YouTubing?
Not very long. I think it's been about a year and a half now. I've been, kind of watching, the distributist content and or the people for years. But I don't think I had started making anything. I think the channel is about a year and a half old now or so. Yeah, maybe a little older than that.
Nice. Wow. And it seems like your Twitter profile has grown a bit faster than your YouTube channel even. How has that happened?
Yeah, that was very weird. It's definitely a situation where I had just started doing the YouTube thing and heard Twitter was a good place to put, your stuff out so people could find it. So that's the only reason I had a Twitter account, was to shill my YouTube channel. And then, yeah, I didn't have a lot of followers at first, but just after picking up a few here and there, and then I got some retweets from some bigger accounts, and before I knew it, I had more Twitter followers than YouTube subscribers, and now it's way out of control comparatively. I think you certainly help with that. You were recommending some of my stuff earlier when I still had a smaller account, so that certainly helps. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, my pleasure. I often say that, the guest that I'm interviewing is one of my favorite posters on Twitter. In this case, you're very, very high up there. I really love the way you post. Like, I feel like if I was, I don't know, if I posted a bit better, I'd probably post more. I mean, I think I agree with you on a lot of stuff. So I rarely do I see a post of yours that I'm like, yeah, this is a miss. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're kind of on the same wavelength with a lot of things. So yeah, that's why, it's music to my ears, whatever you put out.
No, I appreciate it. Like I said, it's not something I expected at all. It was a big surprise. But more than happy to have it. Of course, it certainly makes getting YouTube videos out easier. So not sad about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of had a similar trajectory because I was doing my writing and my blog posts, and then I was like, oh, apparently you should post these on Twitter. So I went to Twitter. Yeah, about it was around this time last year, and then yeah, things kind of took off, and then I've got the idea that maybe a podcast would be a good idea. So yeah, Twitter is definitely a catalyst for these things. I think it's really interesting to kind of focus first on our backgrounds because, like I said, we've kind of come to a point where our worldviews are similar, but we've come from fairly different backgrounds. So, like I've mentioned on this podcast before, my background was kind of the pretty much like a Reddit atheist without necessarily being on Reddit. I was on different forums and making cringy memes and all that type of stuff, and then rationalism, effective altruism, things like that, and then like slowly, comparing the worldview that was presented by these corners with what I was seeing in reality, and stumbling upon Nick Land and then Moldbug. I kind of, got red pilled, and and I kind of drifted outside of these spheres. And I think your background is a bit different. It's a bit more normie, conservative. So how did you come to the realization that things are not as they seem?
Yeah, no, like you said, I definitely started off in a more normal American GOP conservative situation. I worked in kind of Republican politics a little bit, and then I ended up being a reporter, a political reporter for kind of a local newspaper, and so it had always been something I was really interested in. But as I got more involved kind of on the ground and then, looking at things through the journalist lens, I started realizing that politics didn't actually work in the way that I've been taught in school or even that I had espoused previously. And so as I kind of looked for alternatives, I ran into guys like the distributists, and and then Moldbug and Land and those people. And so I kind of slowly came to the same realization, like from a different direction, but realizing that so much of the kind of the mainstream GOP understanding of politics is just controlled opposition, doesn't have a hope of making a difference, and needing to find something that explained why that was the case and why the things that were being described as you look at the New York Times or something like that, and every middling GOP congressman is a threat to democracy and the end of America as we know it. How could these people actually be just completely controlled and make no threat to the system if they're being described as huge threats to the system every day by the world's biggest news outlets? And the more you interact with these people and the more you interact with politics and kind of inside baseball, the more you see that's a problem and go looking for other options.
One of the places where people land first when they have a shock with with the reality of the thing we call wokeness, where their lying eyes are not compatible with the things they see in places like the New York Times or through mainstream media, or hear from their friends, or get harassed by at work, is the so-called IDW, the intellectual dark web, or I don't know what should this be called, the kind of classical liberal wing and I've kind of hung out in those places as well. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like that's kind of the first port of call if you're interested in this. Jordan Peterson's kind of tangentially part of that as well. Um, I What you're in is not the IDW. So the intellectual sphere that you're a part of, and I probably consider myself part of as well, is not the IDW. I mean, what is wrong with the IDW from your perspective?
Well, it's just more liberalism is the problem. It's just they just want liberalism to kind of wind back to the 90s. And that's the problem with a lot of, I think, opposition to wokeness, is whether it's the IDW or more mainstream conservatism, it's still fundamentally taking on those values. It's just asking for earlier versions of it. It's just thinking that if we can just peel back some of the newest updates, then it'll be fine. But really, when you start looking at what the IDW has to offer, it really doesn't have a critique of wokeness other than basically it just got a little too puritanical. It went a little too far. It doesn't have any problem with the underlying assumptions, and you can see this pretty much always when it comes down to actual opposition, because the IDW will almost always end up siding safely with progressives. You see this with people like Sam Harris. No matter how dangerous they say he is, no matter how radical or how Islamophobic or whatever they'll call him, at the end of the day, he's still on their side, and he's going to come down and land safely within the Overton window. Because fundamentally, he still holds their values. He simply isn't willing to go along with, like I said, the latest updates.
Yeah. So essentially, the problem is with liberalism. I wonder if um, because what I've seen happen in the IDW in the last, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years, and why I've kind of drifted away. One, it was the lack of answers, like you said before. It didn't really make sense to me. Two, it was I feel like they don't really understand power. They don't understand concepts like, what is truth, what is the individual. They tend to call anything that's outside of, like, I don't know, like a positivist lens, so they call it postmodernist. And I feel like all of these definitions are a little bit jumbled. I understand that there has to be kind of, a friend enemy distinction, and they've drawn the line between, realism or, positivism and postmodernism. Everything outside of our circle is postmodernism. I've been called postmodernist for some reason. And I don't know, I feel like because they can't really fight the core of liberalism, they tend to end up fighting these kind of definitional battles. Like, okay, so what is CRT? Oh, it's something that flows out of the Frankfurt School, and then we talk about people in the Frankfurt School and what were they wearing, and did they like their baguettes, and but they were Jewish and Nazis and all this type of stuff. There's the number of articles and content flowing out of that is infinite, but it doesn't really address the core problem. So I don't know. I'm curious what you think about that. Do you think it's causal? Because to me, it feels like it's just a one big mill about talking about, I don't know, neo-Marxist whatever.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways they're still approaching, like you said, approaching this as if it's the only problem is just the marketplace of ideas, and if you can just properly, parse the definitions, if you can get everyone to agree rationally, then we can all just move forward as we're supposed to. I think that's entirely missing the point. I think that they continue to live in this space, like I said, where you can just kind of go back to whatever their ideal 90s or 80s or 60s, whatever that time was, when they thought that everyone was being objective and science ruled and rationality was king. And once you can get people to properly define their movements and understand that, then everything works itself out, because at the end of the day, rationality is the ordering principle, and it's not, and they don't understand that, and because they don't understand that, they get stuck in these debates over terminology that in the end of the day is not going to make the difference, and they just don't understand why.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, and I feel like there is just this entire sphere of thought that is completely ignored, and I think it's to me it feels a bit like gatekeeping. It's like no friends to the right type of approach, where any sort of questioning of this rationalist principle of positivism is branded as postmodernism, because we will not even venture into the critique of liberalism from the right, which there is a whole lot of. A lot of it you explore on your channel. Anything from Burnham to Machiavelli, Mosca, all sorts of thinkers, Spengler. There is a lot of thought that's flown into this part of the critique, but this is not even postmodernism; it's fascism, and we're not going to open that box. So I don't know. I feel like it's not. I mean, once you open the box, there's nothing. I mean, some of it. If you go into some corners, they would probably describe themselves directly as fascist. But it's essentially a very useful lens to take on. I feel like a lot of people are missing out by not seeing reality like that. It offers much more explanatory power than whatever what is it, equality of opportunity type dialogue is
Right.
happening, and yeah, and
Yeah, I think the fact that pretty much post World War II, there's only three lenses through which anything in the world can be viewed is causing a lot of the problems, right? Everything's either communism, liberalism, or fascism. There's nothing else. There's nothing, no doctrines, no understandings, no political theory, no philosophy that existed pre 1945 can actually be understood as anything but an extension of one of those three ideologies. And I think that's really dangerous, because then you end up, like you said. I mean, obviously, liberalism is the preferred one. Communism is the accepted opposition, and obviously, the word fascist basically just lights everything on fire. It makes it impossible to talk about, which is not an accident. But there are plenty of, like you said, right wing critiques of liberalism coming from guys like Thomas Carlyle, who many people have described as a socialist, or guys like Joseph de Maistre. And so there's plenty of critiques of liberalism well outside any of those those other two options that are presented currently today. And I think it's incredibly important to take those on because obviously the like I said the current IDW formation is failing, and it's pretty obviously failing to oppose wokeness, and kind of the limp-wristed version of the right that we see today that leads especially the American GOP simply does not have answers. All of their answers are either to basically just adopt what liberalism was 20 or 30 years ago, or to just talk about individual rights ad nauseum. And the reason that you kind of saw someone like Jordan Peterson, even though Jordan Peterson is still very squarely in the classical liberal camp, the reason I think you saw a lot of interest in Jordan Peterson is he was talking a lot less about rights and a lot more about responsibilities, a lot more about taking on the challenges that grow, bettering yourself, bettering your community. And while there are many people who still have problems with what he says, and I understand that, the fact that he was willing to talk about and use that kind of language, I think, is what created so much more energy around him than any other member of that movement, because he was the only one offering anything that really was different and meant something to people and could make positive changes in lives, even if it was only the very tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I feel like there's the difference between him and most of the other people is that he was talking about limits in a way. He was the first person who would take his little flag and stake a claim over moral ground, which no one wants to do nowadays. It's just it's everything. It's we're kind of socially libertarian, and that's kind of what you should be. Socially liberal, fiscally conservative is the rallying cry of so-called classical liberal, and I don't know. It's I feel like that was really inspirational to me. I really liked Jordan Peterson when he came out. I think now I probably don't follow him as much. One, because he fell off the map, and two, because I feel like he kind of he hits that limit of um he in a way, what was interesting about Jordan Peterson was his own personal philosophy, even his like kind of crypto Christianism, Christianity that he was presenting. It was more about his personality rather than his perspective on political theory, which I think is not necessarily very mature, but it was um there's something in him, his the fact that he wrestled with, the atomic bomb, and with the concept of evil. He had, the idea of kind of effective truth rather than, extreme rationalism, which I think he's still a bit murky about, because he wouldn't necessarily be a classical liberalism if he actually took that idea to its logical conclusion. So I think it was more about the person. He was a prophet type, and that's what people gravitated towards.
Yeah, I think Peterson took kind of the rational, de uh, uh, you know, took the rational. I'm trying to say de-deified, and that's not how you say that. But yeah, he took the rationalized version of the Christian ethos as far as you could take it. He went as far as you can go with that, and you can almost see and that has a lot of appeal to people who have been trained that this is the only way to investigate truth. Being able to lay things out the way that he did and show eternal truths in a way that people are more willing to accept in the modern era, it is valuable. But you can certainly see where he hits those walls, right? And the walls are always in his inability to leave his own tradition of kind of classical liberalism and take the next natural step in things like faith and in things like embracing a metaphysic outside of what his original comfort zone. Like almost all of his limits come from his inability to move beyond that classical liberalism into the next the next step of the ideas that he's exploring.
Mhm. So to go back to kind of a previous step, I mean, in your perspective, just as short as possible, if you can summarize it, what is wrong with liberalism? Why isn't this the end of history as promised? Why can't we make this work? Why can't we go to the so-called Fresh Prince version of
Yes.
liberalism?
Yes, as Academic Agent says, going back to Fresh Prince. Yeah, no, going back to the 90s. It's there's a lot of problems. The main thing is that liberalism was a mechanism for obfuscating uh, kind of the friend enemy distinction. There, you have groups, and you have groups that disagree about the ultimate good, and in groups disagreeing about the ultimate good usually threaten kind of the existence of the other group. And these group things have manifested themselves in pretty violent ways. And so it's pretty understandable that people were looking for a system to kind of universalize ethical behavior. And liberalism kind of made this promise. It said, look, guys, we're going to take away the big questions. We're going to take away the big questions of who's actually, God, or what's actually reigning over the universe, and what the absolute moral law is, and we're going to basically like reduce morality down to its minimum components that is going to allow us to all function together. And for a little while that magic worked, right? Like it enabled a lot of economic growth. It allowed markets, to flourish, because people could no longer had to worry so much about what the other person believed. There were certain things, certain topics that were just kind of, off the table, and we all just kind of operated in a minimum amount of morality to kind of make this whole thing function. The problem is that, like, the whole time there is no actual like neutral marketplace. There's no neutral system we can put in place to govern. The whole time when we were doing this, there's still people running this whole thing, and those people have belief systems. And so slowly and surely, the belief systems that were allowed to operate inside the market outcompeted those that had been banned from the market. So, separation of church and state is a famous phrase that people banty about for America, even though it's not in the Constitution. But it's something that people have hardwired into them, is that we have to have this separation of church and state. And so the fact that, that explicitly religious ideas were moved from the public square meant that other ideas that weren't directly religious, that didn't have that connotation, were the only ones that were allowed to compete. And the people who were running the whole thing had those. And so this whole time, when everyone was being told that there was basically no there's no ethic running this thing. We're all neutral. There's just a system. There's a neutral arbiter. The whole time there's actually someone's values. There's someone in charge, and so we're starting to see that kind of become obvious. We're starting to see. I'm sorry, I'm getting lost.
No,
I'm sorry.
you
Can you
mentioned.
be able to do some editing there?
No worries. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, this is a pretty rambly podcast anyway. So I know
Yeah.
this is just a very wide net, but I think I understand, like,
Right.
the truth is, and this is something I talk about as well. There is no regime without a regime ideology. It just does not work. And I think it's interesting that it seems to me that liberalism essentially makes the absence of ideology into an ideology. There is no void. The ideological void abhors its own vacuum, and it fills itself with this strange ethic of tolerance, in a way. Because I feel like, liberalism is a logical system to overlay over Christianity. But you have to. Christianity is the fundamental system that it works with. But without it, it's just the ethic of tolerance of these extremely empty, virtues, so-called virtues, and then you just let that run loose and call it common sense, and then obviously you get this kind of monstrosity that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, liberalism makes your society basically eventually unable to defend itself, because it's so interested in its ability to be objective, its ability to create that neutrality, that it's then unable to resist forces that don't really care about that and are more than willing to invade and impose their will on them. The whole time they're basically just trying to tell those people to have better manners when when they don't care. They're more than happy to destroy your civilization, and that's why I think so many people are shocked when they see the left come into power and then pull up the ladder of free speech behind them because they don't they thought that the free speech was really the value. They thought that the neutrality was truly the value. But it wasn't. It was simply a path to power. And once the progressives had that power, they're more than willing to silence their enemies. And you see a few people who really had that, that value as a core value in the IDW. Those are the people who stand around blinking, looking shocked that they've now been pushed outside the coalition. Barry Weiss and Dave Rubin and those kind of people, all thinking that I thought we were really for free speech and all those things, but they weren't. And as soon as those values were no longer necessary to grab power, the people who were willing to stand and on those particular values were quickly pushed out of the coalition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's the limit between friend and enemy, and the enemy does not have free speech. That's never been the case.
Well, they just didn't understand that. Like they just, like I said, they simply did not understand where their position was in the coalition. And this happens all the time, right? Like you see this cycle, the neocon cycle happen every 20 to 30 years. You have the right as it stands in America, especially, is now basically completely constructed of people who were shoved out of the left, right? Like you have guys like Ronald Reagan or Dennis Prager say, "I didn't leave the left left me," which is, I guess, true, but that means all your lions of the right, especially in America, are just former leftists who got pushed out of the coalition. And so the right doesn't really have a firm ideological foundation or a leadership that is interested in moving or in actually conserving any of these values. They really, like we said, they just want to move liberalism back a few steps. They offer no real opposition, and I think that has gone on for so long that you see the new crop of Dave Rubins or whoever are now becoming that same new group of neoconservatives inside the right wing movement, and so you never actually have any real opposition. You just have left wing people who got pushed too far because they didn't move along with progressivism.
Is there any inherent stopping point in this mechanism? Is there a point where there's going to be so many so many leftists churned out the other end that there's not enough leftists in the machine?
I don't think so. I mean, that's where all the power is, right? That's where all the rewards are. So, yeah, they're burning through a lot of human capital. But when the trick is when you hold every piece of the reins of power, you kind of can just keep rewarding friends, and everyone's going to go there because that's where all the rewards are, especially as their ability to control everything from employment to whether or not you go to jail for you defending yourself, being able to reward all your friends and punish your enemies on literally every level of society makes it pretty hard for you to just kind of run out of people who are willing to go along with whatever you're pushing. But I think the thing that eventually just hits the wall, the things that stops the skid, is that the system just breaks down. That's at some point you replace everyone who's competent and can make the system function with people who are loyal and completely dependent. You see this throughout history. Every tyrant does this at some level, and if you replace enough functional people with enough sycophants, eventually, just the whole system topples over, which is far from ideal. It's not what anyone's looking for. But at this point, I don't see anyone I don't see any other way in which kind of this machine stops. I don't see people arresting the move leftward or kind of turning things around. Because, like I said, you don't even have a coherent opposition. Usually, you just have people who've been tossed out of the machine.
Is there any way that there could be a parallel counter elite or underground counter elite that could topple through competence, through um, sheer embrace of reality? Because we're at the point where a lot of this stuff is just completely at odds with nature, and that just has to give eventually. So, is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think I think you can have a opposition that can do that. I don't think that I think they're more likely to then enter power once things kind of the things that aren't working kind of fall away, right? Like eventually, if things just don't work, if the society functions, if you can't feed people, if you can't defend people, if you can't, make electricity, then people will support people who have the competence level to do that, to who are willing to organize society in a way that will keep them safe and will make things work. Um, and so I think there's a value, of course, in having those people ready. Uh, but like I said, I just don't see a way for them to enter at the moment, because one of the things that we, are, excuse me, one of the things that we really have an issue with right now is just the vast control that the machine currently has, right? Like it's the American empire is not, simply located in the 50 states. It's, reaches into pretty much every advanced civilization. Almost every advanced civilization is in some way dependent on this system and bought in, at least at some level, on the values and incentives of the system. And so it's very hard for opposition to form pretty much anywhere else. I do think that you're going to see, especially you're starting to see the cracks with things like the supply line crisis and that kind of thing, where you're seeing very direct and material consequences uh, to just kind of letting these things atrophy for so long. And so you might see some flurries of people trying to kind of kind of paste over the issues. You'll see, Reagan style people get elected to try to make the system last longer and eke out more life from it. But I don't see like a bunch of Peter Thiels, stepping in and completely reorienting society in the next 10 years, because people are so sick of what's happening right now, unfortunately.
A great poster had this tweet, and he was on this podcast, Extra Dead JCB. He would said that um, politics is just religion that people actually believe in, um,
Yeah.
or something like that. And I
Yeah.
feel like you've made this point as well. I think before that the power of wokeness is that people really believe in it, and that it's it is an animating ethos for so many people, and it's so easy to opt in, and it kind of makes sense. So I feel like is that the problem with shaking it off? It is, it is a kind of a religion for a time.
I mean, it is, and that's certainly an issue. It's the natural evolution of, like I said, pushing all of the religious systems out of the public square. That's where I was going when my brain fell off the train there. But by pushing all the religious systems out of the public square, you basically ensured that some kind of materialistic version of religion was going to reign supreme, because it was the only one that was allowed to compete anymore. You can't teach Christianity, you can't teach Judaism, you can't teach Islam. You can teach progressivism. And people need meaning, people need purpose, people need some kind of moral system to glue their life together and get them motivated. And if that's the only game in town and the only one that's allowed to exist in public life, then yes, it's going to win, right? Just inherently. There's no such thing as a secular society. We're all ruled by churches, as Nick Land said. There's no society that has ever existed without a founding myth and without a some kind of moral framework to bind the community together and move it forward. And so, because progressivism is literally the only one that's allowed, to enter public life, it's kind of by default going to win. I think it's hollow. I think it's soul destroying. I think it ultimately leaves people in terrible positions in a way that traditional religions don't. And so, like we said, it does burn through human capital faster. You look through, you look at all the issues that they are trying to push. You look at all the corner cases, all the tiny percentages of the population that they're trying to turn into martyrs to create the next civil rights conflict. I mean, eventually the ideology does run out of steam, and then they just kind of try to coast on pure power for a while. I think that you are seeing some of that. I think you are increasingly seeing members of kind of the progressive regime just being willing to come out and say, you're going to do something because we forced you to do it, and we don't care. We don't have to pretend it's neutral. We don't have to pretend that we had to convince you about it. Like, you're going to do it because we're in charge. And that will create some level of pushback. That makes their power obvious, but more brittle when you have to exercise it that way. Like, it is in one way a flex. Like, you have that power, you are powerful, but there's a reason that the soft power was more successful. It's because you don't have to shove it quite so hard in people's faces, and it's easier to convince them slowly. But as that whittles down, and as I think the religiosity of progressivism becomes more and more evident, it's harder and harder to keep up this charade about the moral neutrality of the market and the secular state. And I think more and more people are willing to just call this stuff evil, and I don't think that's a mistake. I think it's because it is now manifesting itself more spiritually. People are more willing to use spiritual language to critique it.
Yes, I've seen people openly talking about demons. I'm increasingly tend to talk about it in those terms, just because it's the symbolism is becoming quite obvious, and the willingness to sacrifice children on the altar of this ideology is also becoming very obvious. And the callousness with which people are doing that is also very obvious. So I don't really think there is a better metaphor than essentially demonic possession of our culture. And people make fun of that. The kind of the Reddit tier atheists are like, oh, everyone's sounds like I don't know, 1980s Tipper Gore, school marm, like, oh, the satanic panic. I don't know. I was one of those people. I was definitely one of the deepest, most Reddit atheists you could ever find. Very, very cringe. And I understand why this language is needed now, because you've got a very good a little useful little meme that you apply to many situations. They're just evil, and they want to diddle kids. And since I've become a mother, my spidey senses about this have become very, very highly attuned to what's going on, and it's pretty disturbing what I see every day. And I know I'm in my right wing echo chamber, and I see relatively cherry picked stuff and the extremes, but still this stuff is ratcheting up really, really fast. And the Overton window on the pedophile side is there's someone trying to pry it open quite violently.
Yeah, there's a number of people doing so aggressively, and it's they don't feel the need to hide it anymore. And why would they? It's the logical extension of their moral reasoning. Consent is the only value, and at the end of the day, if children can consent to changing their gender, well, there's only one more step left, right? And this is the thing about one of the things I don't like about, again, the IDW types or those that have moved away from progressivism but still hold on very strongly to the liberalism. They always think that they're scoring points by pointing out that, oh, this is just like the moral majority in the 1980s. You sound just like those evangelicals in the 1980s. Funny thing is, they were right about everything, right? Like, the slippery slope is the undefeated champion. Like, it was right about everything that was going to come down the ladder. It may have been underestimating it by too much, actually. If it has any fault, it's that the moral majority of the 80s undersold what would be coming down the line. And I think that, like I said, the ability to translate a lot of those evils into very secular, cold, scientific language allowed a lot of this stuff to advance without critique, right? Opposition to these things was ignorant and religious and foolish. Enlightened, scientific, progressive people understand that there's no inherent difference between men and women. There's no real difference between a heterosexual and homosexual relationship. There's really just no ethical difference between these things. They're purely scientific. They're chemical. And by translating it into that language, they were able to shame a lot of people out of their disgust factor for things like sexualizing children. But now that I think it's like I said, I think more and more of these things are manifesting themselves more spiritually. People on the left are more willing to put these things back into religious language, and that's where you're seeing a lot of this reaction, because people are suddenly like, whoa, what happened? Like, when did this become okay? And like I said, nothing makes that quite as obvious as the way children are being treated, as willing as they are to feed children into the machine to make it work. It's very clear that the next frontier is sacrificing the future of children along the giving 9-year-olds puberty blockers, this kind of thing. And it's hard not to see like you said, the evil and the sacrifice involved in that.
Yes, we're all just stardust, rational, consenting stardust. And I really like your perspective on the fact that this has been snuck in through the scientific lens, through this kind of scientism, because it isn't science. Like, there are scientifically verifiable differences between men and women. I'm sorry to say, and between many other groups. So I'm sorry to say that. That's one of the things we believe here at Subversive. Um, but also the fact that making it science means that that is the frame we're already talking in, because I feel like especially with the transgender movement, which wasn't a thing. I mean, even 5 years ago, this is a very new, like you said, micro category that's becoming a martyr. The fact that we had to accept the premises, like, I feel like even the GOP, wasn't like 5 years behind. You couldn't be 5 years behind, because 5 years ago this thing didn't even exist. They were like 2 months behind. Things were already negotiated at the level of, oh, teenage girls should probably not be able to use puberty blockers or get a mastectomy, and that was the considered GOP position on the problem. While I've, as a terrible, disagreeable woman, I'm like, why are we accepting the premise? This whole thing is absolutely insane. Men cannot transition into becoming women. This is the level of that the discussion has to start, not about who's cutting which parts off and who could and who gives their consent about this stuff. And I thought that was absolutely insane. Like, the second I dropped into the conversation, things were already so far along, because like you said, this has been smuggled in through the language of science, where anything is interchangeable. The only thing that matters is the homunculus that guides the molecules through the space goo, or whatever Reddit metaphor you want to use. So I feel like, is there any possibility to as considered realistic people, to step out of the framing that we've been given, and take it back to reframe things, like, not always be in the Democrats are the real racist frame, just completely step out of it. I know it's tricky, but is there a possibility?
Yeah, there is, and it's stepping over a lot of that language. It's one of the things Nick Land says is, whenever there's a disagreement, there's a possibility to rule. And that basically, like, once you engage in a dialectic on these kind of fundamental axioms, like children, you don't sexualize children. Like, once you engage in that discussion, and you're in a negotiation, and then once you start that negotiation, it will move left. It will, and there's no way to avoid it. You have to have core values that are untouchable and undebatable, which goes exactly against liberalism, right? Everything is debatable, everything is up for discussion, everything can be arrived at a rational, no, it can't. The answer is, you can't sexualize children. That's it. That's the end of that. There is no discussion on this topic. And until that's a position people are very comfortable having, and they don't feel shamed by saying that, they don't feel like they are intellectually lesser by not going out and needing to cite 19 sources to prove that you shouldn't sexualize children. I'm trying to remember, a couple days ago, there was a guy who was posting, you don't have enough, there aren't enough sources you're citing to show me that pedophilia is evil, you know. And that's where we're at. That's absolutely where we're at. It's the logical conclusion of the moral system we've put in place. And if you continue to embrace this ethic of, I have to be able to bring, you know, the rational argument to every situation to defeat an evil idea, you're going to lose. You're guaranteed to lose. There's these people, you know, there's C.S. Lewis has a book. It's the second book in his space trilogy, and there's a scene where he puts basically the main character on this new planet where there's a new Adam and a new Eve. And every day, and basically, like, God charges him with keeping the devil from like tempting the new Eve and creating the fall on this planet the way that they did in other planets. And every night, you know, like every day, he you know, explains to Eve why the new Eve, like why she should follow God and why that makes sense and that kind of thing. And then at night, like when he falls asleep, the devil comes and basically like explains to her that this was all stupid and you should. And he wakes back up, and basically all his work is out undone, and like Eve is just, you know, back to where she started and even closer to, you know, being tempted and falling away. And this goes on for many nights. You know, every day he wakes up and makes what he feels are very rational arguments because he's a university professor and he knows how to, make very strong argumentation. And then he falls asleep at night, and, you know, the devil just undoes his work almost instantaneously. And eventually it just comes to the point where it's like, why didn't you just beat him to death with a rock? You know, like it's evil. He's using the language of evil to, you know, you're not going to win an argument with the devil when it comes to evil. And then again, this is not like, you know, obviously advocating for anything. What I'm saying is that if you keep playing these people's game on their terms, you're going to lose long term. Like that's what's going to happen. You have to be willing to step over it and say, like, no, this is clearly an evil thing. You cannot allow it. And if you continue to debate it, you're always going to lose. You're always going to be, like you were saying, in that negotiation before you even realize it. You already be far down that path before it even occurs to you that you cross the line, you know, way back.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels to me in a way that you could look at leftism as something very fundamental, almost like a law of nature. You could say, you know, it's essentially that's a satanic principle. But even in physical terms, it's essentially just like societal entropy. And it's very hard to stave off entropy in any sort of system if it's not, you know, a closed system where you exert actual effort in staving it off, and, you know, and protecting your surfaces from corrosion, and, you know, constantly creating the order out of this ancestral chaos. And I wonder that, you know, in a way, is that the ultimate black pill? Are we fighting, you know, the fundamental principle of nature?
Yeah, like so this is Curtis Yarvin's famous, you know, Cthulhu swims slowly but it always swims left. You know, that the left is really entropy. It's really the breakdown of civilization and its rules and its laws and its norms. And it's a ongoing process that's always with us. And I guess in some ways you could be black pilled by that, but I don't think it is, because I think it I think it's essential. It's an essential thing to understand. You know, you look at nature and you realize that anything worth doing is a battle against entropy. You know, maintaining your home, exercising, maintaining your body. You know, like maintaining your marriage, your relationship with your kids. You know, your relationship with friends. It's all a battle against entropy. If you leave it alone, if you don't tend it, if you don't care for it, eventually it slowly destroys itself. And this is true of societies. You know, you building a society that is ordered and for the common good is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly rare that you put one of these great civilizations together and it doesn't stay together on its own. And eventually, over time, there's always power in offering people options outside of the society's traditions. And so there's always people who are able to tell those out of power who don't like the way society's going, if you follow me, if you do what I want you to do, then I can get you power. We can make the things you want allowable. We can remove that tradition. We can remove that taboo, and things will be fine. Things will be better. That is always a easy path to power for people, and it's very difficult to instill those virtues, instill those traditions that guard against that push back so hard. Like I said, just saying, no, I'm sorry, you cannot sexualize children. I don't care what the context is. If you don't have something like that automatically built in and triggered as soon as someone tries to cross that line, then it will just slowly wear away. Entropy will eventually just eat away at that value, because there's just always power in offering people more of what they want in that area. And so I think it's just something to know. I think that it's kind of just part of you know being human. I think it's part of a heroic tradition to be able to fight against that entropy. It's always there. You never get to the finish line. You never get to spike the football. You always have to fight against it, and that's life. And the great people are those that can pick up that duty, and really make it a key part of their life and their value and their existence. So I don't think it's a black pill, as long as you really understand, fighting against that entropy is one of the things that gives life value.
This is a hopeful message that keeps popping up in recent discussions here, and it's the idea that it's a blessing to be living in kind of heroic times, and in times where you have the option to maybe not be the last man, and where you you get an invitation from fate to be something, or to I don't know, to show up, I think. And like you said, yeah, things can be bleak, but that's also an invitation to the right kind of person.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's this weird balance where you want the individual to self improve, and that's where like the Jordan B. Peterson ethos is great, right? Because like at the end of the day, you can't immediately change the world, but you make yourself better, you become worthy, and then hopefully you're able to make enough of a positive change where others want to follow that example, right? Once you have made yourself someone that's doing that. At the same time, there's also the danger of kind of what the mainstream conservative message is, which is just, well, everybody should just then be able to do that. Everybody should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, you know, it doesn't matter if male female relations are wrecked, just get married and figure it out. It doesn't matter if the economy is destroyed and it's impossible to like make a living and have a family, just figure it out. Just be better, just do better. There is a danger in that, right? There's a balance. You have you want the individual to improve, and you want to have that message kind of in the micro, but a macro, you also need to understand that like not every person will be able to do that completely on their own. If there were, then we wouldn't call that behavior heroic, right? We wouldn't have role models, because just everybody could do it. So I think there is uh, some necessity, and that's kind of where Peterson hits the wall. Is like there's a necessity for like to have a collective understanding of like, okay, we need to be able to better things, not just for ourselves, but we need to be able to build a system that allows the average person to then obtain those same things, rather than just like expecting the one heroic individual to like always, everyone to just fill that role and figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like you hit the nail on the head there with what I think is the main blind spot of mainstream conservatism is, I mean, one it's still liberalism in a different package, but it's the idea that um everyone's outcomes will be or can be equal if we have the so-called opportunity of no opportunity of equality.
Equality of opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, one that's not a very coherent concept. If you start digging into that, there's all sorts of differences from people, being born in different types of families. It's a very short road from equality of opportunity to effectively chasing equality of outcome, because the situation is in the world that we live in, people are very different, and people are different, across categories, across ages, across, different levels of ability, all sorts of relevant data points. And that's one thing that I feel like conservatism hasn't addressed, and I feel like it's been losing a lot because of that. Because, to be honest, progressivism has a much better answer than conservatism to this problem, which is a consistent problem. Like, you can run this iteration many, many times, and say, okay, we have equality of opportunity. I mean, do you? Because you don't have equality of outcome, and you consistently don't have equality of outcome in very predictable patterns. What gives? So
Yeah, I think that is a major problem because, like you said, there's only two responses to that. You give equality of opportunity and you don't get opportunity of outcome or equality of outcome, and there's only two possible responses. One is uh, the left wing version, which is, well, everyone is equal, so the only reason that you could possibly have different outcomes is that there's something in the system that's inherently broken. It's a systemically racist, sexist, whatever. And so that's what's producing that outcome, even though people start, increasingly you'll see, progressives willing to admit, like, sure, yeah, there's no like direct legal, difference. There's nothing in the law that limits people, that treats them unequally, but it's all out there. It's all cultural, it's all in the ether. It's outside of the law where we can draw the distinct lines. And this is what produces that. Or you have the more conservative version, which is like, well, of course you're going to have different outcomes because I put in different effort and you put in different effort. And what that does is then it creates a very, Christopher Lasch points out this, creates a very callous version of elites who are only think they got through meritocracy. So they're even worse than your, blood aristocracies, because at least the blood aristocracy felt some level of obligation to the peasant because, well, they were born to that station, right? Like you had to understand, like you had to look out for them because they couldn't do anything differently. As where the purely meritocratic aristocracy just sees themselves as superior because they put in the effort, and you could have been here too, but you just didn't, you just didn't bootstrap properly, and so it's fine if I live in excess and don't better the lives of others, because at the end of the day, well, they could have been here if they weren't so lazy. And both of those are pretty dangerous approaches to viewing, kind of the outcomes we see in our world. And obviously both have pretty deleterious effects.
and meritocracy at the moment finds, or this so-called meritocracy at the moment finds an easy escape from its own feelings of guilt, or any residual feelings of guilt through the gospel of wokeness. Because even if you are a minority that manages to get, I don't know, a position in a consulting firm or on the board of a big company, it's not like you have any obligation to your community except for maybe participating in some accusations or workshops or things that are related to to essentially this to wokeness. So it's a pretty I don't know, low involvement, low touch type of worship.
Yeah, the neoliberalism fix for uh, for communities that are falling apart is to pluck representatives out of that community and put them into positions of power. So as long as you can just put people from each community in the aristocracy, it doesn't matter if the actual plight of the community continues to worsen. You can just point to the people you've placed in the ruling class and say, look, see, you're represented, they could get here. So like you said, that really fixes or at least it's supposed to fix the meritocracy problem, because as Lash points out, like rather than class or community being something that you're bound to and you stay in, and the best and most competent people work to fix the way in which those people live, improve their standard of living, improve the lives that they're leading. Instead, the key value is to flee your class or your community as soon as possible to get to where the ruling class is, where the aristocracy is, and then just serve as a representative of your community rather than actually someone who can stay there and better it.
Yes. You had an interesting video, I think, recently about almost like perpetual adolescence, or I don't know exactly how you phrase it, under liberalism. I think you can see this in this new category of people. I mean, kind of these the NEETs or hikikomori, or even what we call on Twitter kind of Reddit Reddit style people who are in this, I don't know, strange consumption pattern, and it is kind of like a perpetual adolescence. Um, it's yeah, essentially kind of want to let you go and explain that. I mean, is this inherent in liberalism, the inability to grow up?
Well, I think it's there's a great Cicero quote, and I'm not a huge fan of Cicero, but he does have really good quotes, and it's basically about how to not understand your history and not join in kind of the great chain of being, to kind of join your ancestors in the experience of kind of becoming an adult and contributing and building is by definition to remain always a child, is to continue to live in the world of a child. And I think that that is a big push today. I think a lot of people are denied the experiences that make you a man or a woman, that make you an adult. They're denied, we extend adolescence as far as possible. You stay in college, until you hide in college until you're, you know, 26 getting your graduate degree, and you come out and you're so busy paying off the debt from that degree and finally going out and partying because you're out on your own, that kind of thing, that you don't find a mate until your late 30s, early 40s, and then you have no kids. You never own a home. You just you never become a leader in your community. You never become you're not a member of anything. You're not a member of a church. You're not a member of organizations, because that would be too many ties to hold you down and keep you from enjoying the next Marvel movie or putting enough time into the next video game. And so you're just avoiding all these experiences that normally would have transitioned you out of adolescence into adulthood. uh, and we always have this idea that we're supposed to be comfortable and ready for all of them, which is a very modern thing, right? Like, I'm not ready to be a husband or wife. I'm not ready to be a parent. Like, well, tough, right? Like, throughout history, the answer to that was, well, too bad, because you are, like, that responsibility is yours now. And that, you got to sink or swim, and those sink or swim moments is what turns you into an adult. And we're just in a situation, and I don't want to make this sound like the you again want to avoid the kids these days, they don't take any responsibility thing. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying society is specifically engineered to remove a lot of these experiences. Just rent forever. You don't have to own anything. You never need to have this. By offering people this option of staying a child and this path of least resistance, you're not only robbing them of their adulthood, you're basically, by keeping them a child, you're also keeping them a slave. You're always keeping them as someone who is dependent and needs you and who's more easily controlled. So this is something the system is more than willing to encourage and facilitate.
Yes, the infamous adulting, which is
Yes.
almost like a LARP of, kind of a commoditized version of what an adolescent might think an adult has to do. It includes of paying bills. I think that's probably most of adulting. Waking up on time, going to an office job somewhere, and hopefully, hopefully not getting, I don't know, not getting into too much trouble. But that's, yeah, it's a very limited version of what an actual adult does. And you can see that it's another one of those individual pursuits, because the adulting happens usually in like a studio apartment. The people you interact with are the people who send you the bills, the takeout man, Amazon delivery. Adulting is a quintessentially lonely activity. You don't really need, marriage isn't really part of adulting. People don't talk about that. It's all about moving away from home and continuing your consumption journey somewhere else where you pay rent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ideal is almost to completely break any bond or any possibility that another human being would have to depend on you, right? Like it is, the goal is isolation, the goal is atomization, the highest attainable status is to be as isolated and and atomized as you can be. Like that's what makes you higher class, right? And so it really, the more people move away from any friends and family, and the more that we don't see our community as something that we have a duty to, the worse this gets, right? Because again, the fact that a parent died and you had to take care of your brothers and sisters, the fact that you know a girl got pregnant and you had to get married and become a father, these were difficult circumstances that could sometimes end in tragedy, but they're also what made people adults, right? Like these are, no one wants to have to take care of the family for the rest of life. They want to go off and spend all their excess money on whatever the new fashionable thing is, and only focus on their career over. No one wants that to be bound that way. But also the lack of those bonds is what's tearing us apart, and not it's what's making life less and less meaningful, because at the end of the day, those are the things that matter. Those are the things that when you get off the ride. And I think that's why late 30s, early 40s is so often the time where people regret this stuff, right? Because they've got just enough perspective to realize that they didn't form any of those meaningful bonds that really informed the lives of their parents or their grandparents. And sometimes they're lucky and they still have time, but sometimes they don't, and that's a real tragedy. And then your only options are trying to going deeper down this well, or like desperately scrambling trying to fix it in the few remaining years you have. And that's not a position that we want people to be in, but it's increasingly one that the millennial generation and those who coming after them are just going to perpetually find themselves in that late 30, early 40s time frame.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, we're essentially ruled by media, and a lot of the media that people consume informs them about what is high status. And taking care of your brothers and sisters if a parent dies is not high status. And being dependent or taking care of your mother who's sick is also not high status. What is high status is, like you said, leaving the home, moving to the big city, and just engaging in an interesting and eccentric pattern of consumption that's going to reveal your authentic self and advertise it to other people, so that you can take your place among the other high status and very authentic individuals that exist in that milieu. So it's I feel like a lot of the poison kind of came in through this door of authenticity. I mean, what does authenticity mean to you?
Yeah, I don't. Sorry, can you frame that question again for me? I'm not.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. It's just it feels to me like there is this myth of authenticity, and you see it reflected like in all sorts of movies. It's essentially kind of a boomer idea. The idea that once you detach yourself from the earthly bonds, the thing that tie you down, you are free to develop
I see.
uniqueness of yours. There's something unique about you, and then once you have freedom, then it's going to pop out, and that's going to be when you become happy. Once you're authentic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just individuality as the highest goal, right? Like once I'm completely free of the influence of others, I'm no longer tied down to other people or other belief systems, other values. They don't define me. Then I am truly authentic. Um, and the kind of the punchline at the end of that culture is, of course, the people who are completely free of all those things are entirely the puppets of the people who promoted that ideology, right? Like true authenticity is inevitably embracing progressive worldviews, right? It's inevitably parroting everything that those who are actually in charge would like you to parrot. And so this push is, yeah, it is very interesting that the everything that is high status turns out to be like everything that makes you miserable. Like everything that is portrayed in the media as high status and creating authenticity is severing every bond that would have given life meaning. And so the truly high status individual is one who's pretty much entirely dependent on like media and consumption to define their world and their thoughts and opinions. And so yeah, it's just a mechanism for creating, making those things the highest value, making you dependent on that system. Because as long as you can sever, my buddy Merrick of the Good Old Boys was making, I think, a really good point on this yesterday, which was just that was just like if you can just sever every connection to someone, yeah, and tradition, then you can create that like ideal consumer, which is what's the group like 25 to 45-year-old single men. I think is like the target demo in marketing, and that's what they want everyone to be. That's what they want women to be too, is 25-year-old to 45-year-old single men, right? And that because that's the group that's going to have the most income, can be consume the most because they're tied to nothing. They have no responsibilities. They have no family ties. They have no faith ties. There's nothing limiting them from dedicating themselves entirely to their job and then burning all that excess income on whatever media tells them is worth their time.
Yes, and it's kind of a self-flattering idea, authenticity, because like you said, this ends up being people just becoming a sponge to whatever, outside influence wants to take them over, almost like demonic possession. We come full circle. And people do think that they are the rational individual, and that once they sever these ties with the old crusty traditions, they will be free to engage in a lot of choice and a lot of consensual whatever. But I think people are blind to if effects like mimesis, the mimetic desire, things that your authentic self doesn't appear out of the ether. It's there in the things you surround yourself with, in the media you surround yourself with as well. And your my friend, a seasonal click farm worker, made a very good point today about hypnosis. People think hypnosis is this strange, exotic thing, but hypnosis is all around us. People are easily hypnotized, and there's many, many things that can, take possession of you, even if you don't want to use biblical metaphors. Information, memes are very powerful that way, and you have no choice in the matter. You are just there. They're floating around you, and they just drift inside of you very subconsciously, and you build yourself through these memes. And like you said, there's good memes and bad memes, and it seems like the worst memes are the ones that we get promoted through most of mass media.
Well, see, Alex, this is why everyone accuses us of postmodernism right here. This is we're engaging in our postmodernism. Uh, yeah, because yeah, it's absolutely the case. Is again, like people want there to be this neutral place where they sort through all the best ideas, and once they, like you said, once they obtain that individuality and that free thinking, they are able to then take that and create their real self, their authentic self, that is just completely removed from all these old stuffy traditions and values. This whole time not understanding that the value, they are just then feeding into a new set of values that they have been formed of through media, through these memes, through these ideas floating out there. They did not just create this morality out of thin air. It is not a product of their incredibly intelligent brain and an independent mindset. It is something that got handed to them too. And so the question is not, will you be an individual free thinker or be ruled by some kind of ideological mindset or some kind of moral framework. The question is simply which one will rule. And that's something that's really uncomfortable with people because, again, it gets us back to the core problem with liberalism, which is it was supposed to remove that conflict because core conflicts on values get pretty messy pretty quickly. And so we were just supposed to get rid of that, but it just keeps coming back. We can never seem to truly dispense with this, and that's a real problem for people.
Yeah, and it's a painful realization to see yourself as a cluster of memes, very few of your own creation, or maybe you've recombined a few, but everyone wants to think of themselves as an original, and that's essentially the quintessential boomer adolescent fantasy, the idea of originality. But yeah, it's unfortunately not as common as one thinks. Before I let you go, I want to ask you the question of the show, which is, do you have a subversive thinker? And I know you do because that's your job. That's what you do day in and day out. You make amazing videos about these people, that you think deserves much more interest. People, reading them, researching their work.
Yeah, this one, it's almost hard to limit. I would say probably the one if I was just going to pull one that doesn't get a lot of attention today, I guess it would probably be Joseph de Maistre. It's not like Joseph de Maistre is super obscure for people who are familiar, but it's just not someone who enters the conversation a lot. And I just think he speaks very clearly in a very interesting way. He has a voice from kind of a time that was just before the Enlightenment, just before the liberal revolution, and it there's a number of good critics from that time period, but I would say that he's one that I don't think gets enough credit, doesn't get enough attention, and certainly speaks in a language that I think is still pretty relevant today. It's pretty accessible, I think, as compared to maybe some other thinkers who touch on that topic and write in that period.
Okay, and you've done a few videos on his work.
Yes. I've got he does a good job of kind of breaking down why constitutions don't actually like just make governments work. He's got I've got one about the American Constitution from de Maistre, and I know I've used him heavily in at least one other. I should do more. I my His influence on me is not in proportion to the number of videos I have done on him. I need to do more videos on him, but uh, but I think if I was going to recommend one that's a little more off the beaten path, I'm not going to recommend Moldbug. You've had him on your show. Everybody probably he's been on Tucker Carlson at this point. So I think people are, everyone should read Moldbug, but I don't think that's, if you want one a little more off the beaten path, I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people should read Moldbug, even if just before the reading list, because I think a lot of these thinkers, were inspired by his reading.
Absolutely. I mean, most of the rabbit hole I've fallen down when it comes to reading has been off of the Moldbug reading list. It's I would have never read Burnham, de Maistre, Mosca, Prado, all any of these people, Schmidt, if it had not been for Moldbug's blog. So it's a great place to start. But if you want to go deeper, the reading list is where a lot of the meat definitely is. There's a lot of great stuff there.
Exactly. And if you don't want to do this extensive reading, there's someone who's already done it for you, and it is Auron MacIntyre. And you should go watch his videos. I really recommend them. They're very insightful, and if you want to kind of understand, what I mean, reactionary NRX, all of this stuff is very loaded, but this is a different type of lens. This is not postmodernism. This is a critique of liberalism from the right, represented by a lot of interesting thinkers. And I think this is a very revolutionary lens that a lot of people are missing. And you do one hell of a job presenting these ideas. So I really want to point people towards your channel and subscribe, donate, do all of the necessary things, do the needful. And I'm really happy that you came on tonight, or this morning in your case, Auron.
Oh, thank you. No, I really impressed with what you've done with the show. It's funny because you came on my YouTube channel a long time ago, like I think you were right before you were going to start doing the podcast, and so just watching your podcast grow has been really cool. You think you're doing great work, getting some really amazing guests. So I've been glad to see that. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great. I really enjoyed our conversation. Like I'm happy to see that people just didn't say that I'm there are no women on the internet and get fed or something. Because since then it's been a bit tedious in that department. But I mean, that's just the nature of being in right wing echo chambers and showing up as a face lord lady.
I mean, as someone who gets a regular, shipment of Thiel bucks to my front door, I understand. It's like I said, it's hard not to draw those criticisms, but that's fine. If you can't take the heat, then you wouldn't be doing this. So
Exactly. I mean, I still love the dark corners of the dissident right much more than they can smear me. So uh, yeah, I'm very happy to be doing this. It's so much fun, and I get to talk to brilliant people like you. And yeah, I will continue doing this until they stop me somehow. Hopefully not. Cheers. Well, that concludes our chat. Thank you so much for coming on.
absolutely, thank you for having me.